Okay, we are live with Thoughts on Talks, our Black Lives Matter edition, which means that we have Salaam with us. Salaam Thompson, welcome once again.
Thank you. Thank you.
Joining myself, Malayna Dawn, and Reverend Mike McMorrow. And that's him. And Thoughts on Talks is generally, it started as talking about Reverend Mike's Sunday Talks. What is that supposed to be?
I'm trying to point to my name.
His name.
It doesn't look like a point. It looks like you're trying to pick something up.
I'm mirrored. It's so
Right.
confusing.
The mirror thing is weird. But see, this is why we have Thoughts on Talks, because Reverend Mike keeps to his notes pretty well and doesn't digress too much. But here we can digress and we can nitpick and we can make inside jokes or non-inside jokes.
Most certainly,
yeah. And so for our Black Lives Matter episodes, we have Salaam here to educate us and just sort of keep a conversation going that we can share with our communities, whether it's our spiritual communities or our neighborhood. Whoever is joining us is welcome.
Yes.
I know I've learned so much.
It's just a real gift that Salaam is, willing to do this, and you. That you do it so well. So,
thank you. Thank you.
So, Reverend Mike, you want to start with your talk topic for Sunday, and then we'll roll it into the rest.
Yeah, sure. Well, the talk title, of course, was The Infinite Invisible. So this will actually have some interesting tie-ins to the topics that Salaam was wanting to hit today. So there was a quote by Joel Goldsmith. Joel Goldsmith, of course, being one of the Western mystics, American mystics, I guess, if you will. And I should have had this pulled together before we got on that.
I mean, you don't prepare for a conversation with your friends, so that's what we're doing.
And no stand on formality. It's okay, I'm sure.
So we were just talking about, in fact, you may have something to say about this too, right? So we were talking about how in this particular denomination, we do not have ritual. We don't have much ritual, particularly for a clean slate, in the same way that you would have ritual bathing or prayer or bat mitzvah, bar mitzvahs, confirmation perhaps, or even some of the secular ways. And then we spoke to how thinkers like Emerson tried to encourage people to get away from from tradition and the God of rhetoric, and instead have our heart fired by the presence of the Spirit. And again, I think this is going to tie into what you plan to speak to us about today. But the quote I finally found, Joel Goldsmith says, "In going within, we do not turn to our own spirituality or our own goodness or our own strength or our own knowledge, but we go within to unleash the infinite invisible." And I suspect that this has some interesting tie-ins with your Muslim practice as well. And of course, you were going to, I haven't had a chance to see, what was it? The movie entitled?
Judas and the Messiah.
Judas and the Messiah, right. So, which I believe is about the Black Panthers, and I think it was kind of a story of betrayal, right?
It was the chairman, Black Panther Party chairman of the Illinois chapter, Fred Hampton.
Yeah.
His head of security is William O'Neill, and was William O'Neill, and he was only a teenager at the time. And I can just tell you the story if you see the movie how it plays out, but in a
Yeah.
nutshell. But he was a petty car thief, and he was intended joyriding over state lines. He got caught up, and basically he was in a quandary that either you're gonna uh, work with us to infiltrate the Black Panther Party, or you looking at 5 years in state pen for just one charge, and we ain't even threw the book at you yet. So for to 18-year-old, I get how that's wild like that, but in my guesstimation, I felt they did like some snitch sympathy there, in regard to
Right.
how that went. But it's interesting that the talk title was the going within. Forgive me if I'm butchering it or transposing, but going within for the invisible and infinite. If I correct me if I'm wrong there.
Infinite invisible.
The
Yeah.
infinite invisible, excuse me. I look at like the infinitesimal influence of government meddling, of the higher intelligence agencies, and those invisible forces that have worked to undermine the Black Panther Party, that worked to undermine the civil rights movement, that worked to undermine Martin Luther King's movement in particular, that worked to undermine the Nation of Islam, and further fractured the relationship between Elijah Muhammad and Malcolm X. But for this conversation, we're talking about the Judas and the Messiah. That's the name of the movie. But in J. Edgar Hoover's words, he said that he wanted to neutralize any threat, to basically American society by preventing the rise of a Black Messiah. And Fred Hampton, was that. I have a very close friend of mine from high school. His aunt and his mom were Panthers. They both knew Chairman Fred. I have an elementary school classmate who's a pretty friend, has a strong friendship with Fred Hampton Jr. and knows Fred Hampton's mom. So like if Fred Hampton grew up in Maywood, Illinois, so or like take the 290 west of Chicago is right there. It's still Chicago for all intents and purposes. But so that kind of hit home, for me. And the place of his funeral, A.A. Rayner's, was the same funeral home that my father had his home going in. So in my family, the Thompsons knew the Rayners since the 1930s. So they've always had some kind of business relationship, rapport with one another, and you know they've they kept that strong bond through generations. But in this case with Fred, um, here's a man that was 21 years old at the time that he was murdered, assassinated, state sanctioned, by the FBI, the Chicago Police Department, the state prosecutor, Edward Hanrahan, at the time. Here's a man that, because I remember a few weeks ago from what I'm about to say, Rev, when you play devil's advocate and talk about areas of improvement within the Black community. This is a man, Fred Hampton, who embodied that very same thing. This man forged alliances with Jeff Fort. Jeff Fort is the head of L. Rookins and Blackstone Rangers. L. Rookins in the 80s, but Blackstone Rangers was the name of them in the 60s. Jeff Fort, he was on Capitol Hill at one point in time. You probably see video of this in the 70s. So Richard Nixon couldn't stand the guy, and he just announced his name, basically like how Dave Chappelle said, I like on his skit said, "I'm Rick James, bitch," and got up and left. That's basically what Jeff Fort did, to Congress when he was there. Like, I'm Jeff Fort, and he got up, put his black fist up, and he walked out. So Fred Hampton was uniting all the gangs and street organizations, of that day. And if you look at the charters of the Black Gangster Disciples before they splintered into the Gangster Disciples, the GDs, and the BDs, the Black Disciples, under Larry Hoover. Okay, and you look at the Blackstone Rangers under Jeff Ford, and you look at the conservative vice lord movement that was happening on 16th and Lawndale on the west side of Chicago, that was headed up by the late Bobby Gore. And Bobby Gore had, it was a white fellow who was helping them. He helped them file their articles of incorporation to start businesses for themselves on the west side. And that fella's name was David Dawley. And Rev, you kind of remind me of him, but if I'll let you Google him, I won't spoil it for you. But David Dawley was the white fella. Bobby Gore was the head of conservative vice lords. But what happened is, with all these organizations, if you observe their charters, observe their mission statements, they have a lot of parallel, a lot of overlap to the 10-point program of these guys, of the Black Panther Party. So it was all born of that. Once upon a time, GD stood for growth and development. And then now it's Gangster Disciple, right? And been that way for decades. The CRIP it stood for Community Revolution and Progress. You see, but now it's infamously known, as the band of misfits that Stanley Tookie Williams started and Raymond Washington started, and now Tookie is dead, and I won't relitigate what happened with why he's passed away. But you have that issue with the Crips, and you also have the Bloods, and interestingly enough, Black soldiers in Vietnam, you'll hear the phrase the Bloods of Nam. There's an actual PBS documentary that's called The Bloods of Nam, where they interview Black veterans who fought there. And that's where, the DAP comes from, the different handshake ritual that we know. That was part of our thing, like my word is my bond, which and it was critical. But with Black culture, you need someone who has an intrinsic understanding of that. And so you have J. Edgar Hoover, who started what was called the Ghetto Informant Program, and he had what's called the Ghetto Listening Post. So you'll see a white informant, coming a mile away, but that invisible, what Reverend Mike was talking about in his talk title, this is the invisible force, where you had a William O'Neill within plain sight of Fred Hampton, you see, that was working for the feds, pretty much to undermine the unity that was being spawned and created by Fred. I mean, so the Black Panther Party, they started the free breakfast program. Where have I heard that before? That's where Head Start came from. The WIC program that we see today came from the model that the Black Panther Party started. Okay, Medi-Cal, Medicaid, Medicare. That's a concept that the Black Panther Party started. At the time when Fred Hampton was assassinated, he had used donations in his hand because he was about to go down, sent downstate to prison. So he was trying to figure out how to build a clinic for the community. And he was successful, and he's forged alliances with the Young Lords, the Chicano Panthers, if you want to call it that, with the Young Patriots, who were Appalachia whites who were being disenfranchised. Fred Hampton forged those alliances. He forged alliances with the Asian community as well. A lot of people don't know this. If you Google the image of Malcolm X after he was shot at Audubon Ballroom, cradling his head, I forgot the woman's name. You can Google it if you have quick fingers. She's a Japanese woman, and that Japanese woman was in Malcolm's circle. Okay, that Japanese woman also was helped galvanize the Panthers. In her own way. I forget her name. I hate every time I come over here. I always forget people's names, but trust me, I know it. But
is it Yuri?
That's it. That's it. Right
Yuri
there.
Kochiyama.
That's her name, Yuri. She was of Japanese descent. But these are anytime when you're trying to forge alliances, you become a threat because now the power structure can't keep the people divided any
Right.
longer. And so and that's what the importance of this movie being told now. But it's very important, though, Rev, for yourself and other listeners out there. Look at the 1971 documentary on the murder of Fred Hampton first. Also, familiarize yourself with the COINTELPRO documents that are readily available online about when they followed Fred Hampton, what they did to Angela Davis, what they did to Eldridge Cleaver and Kathleen Cleaver, basically splintering up their marriage. Um, yeah, Eldridge fleeing over to, I think it was Algeria, so like, and Angela Davis was a fugitive for some time before they finally tracked her down, and then she legally represented herself. So all this background information go into the Judas and the Messiah movie with that background information and understanding, the full context of where what things happen, because this story is being told to a new generation who don't even know who the Panthers were. Like, there's a new Black Panther Party that was headed by Malik Zulu Shabazz and the late Dr. Khalid Muhammad before, when he left the Nation of Islam, and he started helped start that with Malik Zulu Shabazz. But that wasn't on the level, in my guesstimation, of what Huey Newton, Bobby Seale, Eldridge Cleaver, Geronimo Pratt, Bunchy Carter, Fred Hampton, Mark Clark, Asada Shakur, Feeney Shakur, all these folks who were prominent members of what's my man up who was up in San Quentin, George Jackson. He wrote I forgot the name of his book, George Jackson, but he was in San Quentin when he wrote that book. He was a young man as well, like 20, 21 years old. The late Lil Bobby Hutton, who was 17 years old, killed by Oakland police. I can go on and on. Eldridge Cleaver wrote a book, Soul on Ice. That's another literary work to throw out there. But I spoke enough. Well, go ahead, Rev. I'll turn the floor to you.
Well, I just wanted to back up a little bit.
Sure.
Okay there,
Sorry, Malayna.
So just to kind of set things into context in the time, because I was still a kid because I remember a lot of these names.
Yes.
I remember being on the Air Force Base when guys were coming back from Vietnam, of course. But also, so you have in Chicago, you have a large Black community.
Yes.
Of peaceful people, right? And yet, isn't it true that, and maybe you can help explain this, so the emerging of these gangs, along with the Black Panthers, were involved in criminal activity.
Sure, sure.
With guns and the whole bit, and even within their own community, if I'm remembering, is that true? Yeah,
it's true.
So we can't. So just trying to help explain how that happened, and then how that influences the Black Lives Matter movement today, if it does, right? So many people have so many preconceived notions. For instance,
of course,
we've talked about this on this program with the Nation of Islam. They get caught up with the personalities of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, or the other guy I like to pick on. What's his name? Farrakhan.
Mr. Farrakhan.
Right? But then what gets lost in that is how many people have been lifted out of poverty and out of a self-abusive cycle that poverty can keep you locked into, regardless of race, but specifically the Black community, because we have to also set it in the context of segregation. And I just heard this today on Fresh Air. I can't remember the woman author, but she was talking about how public pools were closed because they didn't want to integrate them.
Mm-hmm.
That these were public pools that everybody enjoyed, that black taxpayers were paying for but could not enjoy, and that they filled them in rather than share them.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So I'm just bringing all this to the table so that was in 59. So now we're in 67, 68, 69, when the Black Panthers emerge and some of these gangs, and the fear that got whipped up around that, which was, I think you've done a great job of kind of explaining how, just the frustration within the community. In fact, I think that movie, One Night in Miami, kind of, even though it's a fiction and it's a fictional representation of the evening,
Mm-hmm.
but it does kind of spell it out for white folk anyway. The struggle between trying to go along to get along,
Mm-hmm.
and then the more radical, we're not going to take this shit anymore kind of thing. So anyway, I just wanted to add that in. And so if you can kind of, because I know this is something that you've studied a lot,
Mm-hmm.
kind of put it in the context of that, and then how does it inform the Black Lives Matter movement today, if it does?
I think it does in this way, and I explain it like this. Okay, I'm going to use a historical reference here. So world history, something that folks are the audience generally is aware of. Post World War II, right? Okay, um, Jews were expatriated from Nazi Germany by Allied forces. Is that correct? Okay, so now we have 1945, 1948. What happens there? NATO was formed. Okay, when NATO was formed, shortly thereafter, there was a little tiny little country that was formed. We know what that country was.
I'm guessing
Israel. I can read Malayna's lips as she was on mute.
I was on mute because of my coughing fit.
Right.
I think it's also important to remember, though, that the United States was not accepting Jewish refugees. It was a gigantic scandal at the time.
Really?
But that gets better. I'm gonna raise you on that one.
Okay.
It gets better. Okay, so 1948, Israel was formed.
Yes.
The very first thing on Israel's docket was what I know. It's like a call and response kind of presentation I'm kind of giving. But the very first thing that Israel did was form Mossad. And I forgot that gentleman's name, but he passed away. I want to say either 2003 or 2010, one of those 2 years. But he was the head. And what Mossad did is they received research from Eli Wiesel on the Nazi war criminals that fled Nazi Germany, left Hitler to die with his mistress and kill himself, whatever. And Argentina's like, hey, yo, homie, come over here, holler at us. We got you. We'll show you love. We'll get you. We'll get you assume identity. We'll get you a job at the Mercedes Benz plant. That's there. We're making German imported parts. And a fella by the name of Adolf Eichmann, was working at that Mercedes-Benz plant. Okay. So long story short, after a nation was established, Israel was a nation established, their first thing was forming a security around that. Okay. So I juxtapose 1948 to October 1966 when the Black Panther Party was formed. Okay. October 1966 with February 1930 when the Nation of Islam was founded. Okay, when Master Farad Muhammad had went away after basically teaching Honorable Elijah Muhammad. So you have two factions who basically say, you know what, to hell with you. We're gonna educate our children. we're going to provide our resources, and we're going to like separate and become an independent nation of our own. So there's no nation that can gain independence without some means to defend itself. You see, so like that's just fundamental. Okay, any nation that throughout history that has gained independence has had a means to defend itself, and has had means and call to arms to do it. But seemingly, when black people, those of us, as it were, decide that okay, now is the time to get this cracker's foot off our neck, and let's go to work and do for ourselves. And now it's like, wait, you fucking with the money. You can't be doing all of that. You see, and so now that's what made now it's now okay. Now there's so division in these organizations. They're getting too powerful. They're getting to this. Nation of Islam never hurt nobody. They've been around for over 90 years. They haven't hurt not one hair on a Jewish person or a white person's head. Okay. Black Panther Party, yeah, they were armed with machine guns, but see, what the gripe that they had, they said, well, this like law and order and this thing that Nixon was talking about, they talk about the affect, but they don't talk about the stimulus that created that effect. And it's almost like a gaslighting, victim blaming kind of a thing, you know. So I'm asking the viewers of this program right here, remember that in context. Don't just look at armed Black Panthers with the leather jackets and berets on, that's armed with AKs or in machine gun fire, and and marauding through neighborhoods and clutching your pearls. Don't look at that. Look at the stimulus that caused that. Look, I shared on Facebook earlier the Kerner Commission report from 1967 that show what are the catalysts that create the conditions in the American ghettos across this country.
Mm-hmm.
And in that, when you start look at that report, you'll see some of the same dynamics, the same factors that are still in existence here in 2021. And that Oval Office has changed hands from red to blue, I don't know how many times over the past nearly 60 years. And the condition still remains the same. You know, so something needs to be examined there. You see what I'm saying? So, like, how does that relate to Black Lives Matter? Bring it home to your question is yes, that Black Lives Matter doesn't, in my guesstimation, doesn't mean that, hey, my life matters. That means my life matters so much that I'm willing to die to preserve it, that I'm willing to kill to preserve it, you know, in the face of aggression. You know, so, and this is a page right out of the supreme wisdom of the Nation of Islam, is that they don't aggress on people unless they're aggressed upon. You know, they don't get into any conflicts. You know, you don't see them like getting pulled over and getting in all kinds of trouble. These are orderly, disciplined, you know, people, okay, who have strong family units, who have a strong basis that's sewn in of prayer, of fasting, of charity, you know, of cultivating your family values, of upholding and elevating our women. You know, this is who the Nation of Islam is. But they think because we get clean shaven and throw on a bow tie, you know, or something that, oh, he's radical. Well, what does a radical mean in mathematics? You know, if we go down, I won't bore people with a mathematical lesson, but math is a numeric representation of science. Hence, you're standing as a spiritual director of in the science of mind. And mathematics is a representation of that numerically. You know, so when we hold to ourselves and hold to our discipline, you know, and elevating our people, empowering our children, and comforting our wives, and our wives are being a source of comfort and putting our mind at ease as husbands and as fathers. Like, that's a building of a nation. Now, why is it that, you know, there are those out there who still have these preconceived notions somewhere back in their subconscious mind, and there are those in elevated spaces who don't wish to see that? Why is that? I mean, is it because that you're used to seeing Black people through a certain lens, that in order for me to have any kind of relational aspect, or with them, a relational kind of you know, as a connection with them, that I have to be seen as better than them. But if they're at a not in a lower state, like Martin Luther King said, if a man stands up and is not hung over, no oppressor can't ride his back anymore. So when that black man stands up, that white folk generally don't know how to relate to that black man and woman who's standing up. They only know how to relate to them when they're hung over. You see, when we're drunk, when we're disorderly, when we're illiterate, when we're besieged with ADHD, when we're drugged, when our families are out of whack. That's how they know how to relate to you. But when you like kill all those ills and detach yourself from all these vices, alcohol and swine flesh and things like that, now you elevate yourself as a black man. Said, this is the pillar, this is the square that I'm standing on. And if you don't have a way of relating to that, that's a personal problem that you need to examine yourself in the mirror. You see, and say, what is it within me that when I see a representation of black excellence that I resent it? And that's a question that I want to put out there to a few of the folks who Reverend Jessica for mentioning, so hopefully she won't mind me mentioning her name like this. But a few of the folks have given her feedback, about what our conversation is about here. Those are the counter questions I want to present to them. Whether they'll be in a form where they'll answer me directly, I'm sure they'll filter their answer back to her, and I'm fine with that too.
So what occurred to me in there, I'm sorry, Rev Mike, to connect the unleashing the infinite invisible back to the Joel Goldsmith quote is when people are empowered and going to their center and unleashing the power within them, the spirit within them, they become very powerful. And to people who want to control those people, that becomes a threat, something to be afraid of.
It's troublesome, yeah.
Yeah.
Because
what were you going to say, Reverend Mike?
You're disrupting order.
Well, I was just going to make the point, and correct me if this is not correct, but so within this construct of the struggle, let's just call it the struggle, that we are talking about Americans who happen to be black, who still see themselves as Americans.
Yes.
And are looking for the promise set forth in our guiding principles set forth by the Declaration and even the Constitution.
Yes.
As imperfect a document as they are, and yet also stipulate the inequity right out the gate from our very first day that we became stamped a nation.
Yes.
When the Constitution was ratified, you still had the 3/5 clause in there. Right? So I'm just putting all of this, I guess the way that I see things is that there's this continuum of consciousness that continues to unfold in the struggle. And what this writer was talking about today, and we have mentioned ourselves together, that as we come to see that as we all embrace the struggle together and move forward together as Americans to address these things, then we all win.
Sure.
Everyone wins.
Yes.
Right. So we pick up the strength of creativity and the diversity component, but also recognizing that though we may not agree on some of the finer points, broadly, we all want our kids to be, as well educated as possible, have enough food, a safe place to live, to be able to walk to school without being harassed.
Yes.
right? So these are all honorable and admirable attributes, and our brothers and sisters in the African American community are getting tired of the talk and tired of waiting.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the way I see it. And so sometimes we've had these militant outbreaks, but nobody stormed the Capitol.
Yeah,
Nobody broke
that's
down
right.
the windows in the Capitol building.
We didn't gouge Capitol officers' eyes out.
Yeah,
We
none
didn't
of that.
maim them.
Yeah, there was none of that going on.
Yes.
And there were a lot more people on the March on Washington, even.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So anyway, I guess I'm just trying to help set things into context, so that we can figure out ways out of, rather than locking horns on, well, you did this to me and now I'm going to do that to you, and so on and so forth.
Mm-hmm.
But I think also, to your point, Salaam, is that we also have to acknowledge that that it has not been, that the inequities still exist.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And so I'm just going to throw this out there. I think maybe that's where the Black Lives Matter tie-in is because of the obvious brutality that is still out there and now being recorded and shared.
Yes.
Sometimes in real time. I think we've all kind of been shaken,
Mm-hmm.
out of complacency. At least I think we have. I think politically, I mean, these things don't move fast,
Mm-hmm.
but we'll see how the next few years go.
Yeah, it's just Black people have been besieged with incrementalism, for generations. I mean, Dr. King. I know a lot of folks in power like to name drop him, for the sake of keeping the movement quiet, keeping Black people's mouths shut, just be happy with what you're getting. But Dr. King wrote about the fundamental evil of time. And he talking about like when they tell you just wait on time, whereas like another man is setting the timeline for your freedom.
Right.
And but they don't talk about that Dr. King necessarily. They give us the sanitized version of Dr. King.
Right.
And I know we're mentioning Dr. King in context with the movie Judas and the Messiah, because Dr. King had reached the same fate of many of the leaders of the Black Panther Party and the Nation of Islam, and other civil rights organizations, as far as death or uh, you know, I guess destroying a man's character, disparaging him, and things that defaming him and so forth. So a lot of that, those little facts that go out of the window. I mean, a lot of people.
And the FBI was used to do those things.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people don't realize that Dr. King was murdered on the hospital bed. It wasn't James Earl Ray. He was alive when he got to the hospital. And according to the documentation, produced by Dr. William Pepper, who wrote the book Orders to Kill, they had orders to take him to St. Joseph. And if he's alive, St. Joseph's Hospital in Memphis, Tennessee, and if he's alive, he is not to leave. And according to a nurse, a Black nurse who was there, when they told her to get out of the way, and the head man, it was a couple of guys that came in suits and ties and said, "Let the nigger die." And then the nurses, and they started spitting on him, and they put a pillow on his face to suffocate him, to kill him. That's how Dr. King died. But they don't tell us that story.
No,
Which is,
I heard this story.
yeah, which is why if you look up the book Orders to Kill by Dr. William Pepper and revisit the 1999 case that Coretta and Dexter, Bernice, Yolanda, and Martin III brought forth against the U.S. government. And the U.S. government settled with the King family, because that they were in fact responsible. So all the while, Lyndon Johnson was posing and cheesing, and we had his daughter talk about how my daddy did right by them and passed the civil rights bill, but he turned around and disparaged and talked about Dr. King like a dog behind his back, and then while he was got up in front of the country on Sunday, March 31st, 1968, and said, I shall not seek, nor will I not accept another nomination for another term as your president. 4 days later, that man is shot, Dr. King, on Thursday, April 4th, 1968. And so I'm wondering, did he know something? This is just me talking. It's not fact, but this is me. I'm wondering if Lyndon Johnson knew what the plan was to get rid of Dr. King at that point, because that started with the Beyond Vietnam speech that he gave at Riverside Church in New York City on April 4th, 1967, 365 days before he was killed. So.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. That
Yeah, I'd have to
it
do
makes me
something
so
else.
like breaks my heart and makes me so sad that somebody who was such a strong and inspiring leader would meet that kind of end.
Yeah, that's the way he died, and but that story is never told when every Martin Luther King Day, every Black History Month, or every commemoration of April 4th when they gather at the Lorraine Motel, and folks want to act like Dr. King that y'all was homies. I mean, the fact of the matter is, at the time when Dr. King died, even in the Black community, he had a 13% approval rating among Black people.
Right.
And he was the most hated man in white America. And I don't even have the figures in front of me, but among Black people, clergymen, church folks, his approval rating was 13%. Okay. And there was a man named Reverend Billy Kyles, and I think he's still alive in Memphis, but he made a Freudian slip that Dick Gregory caught, where he recalled a anecdotal conversation they had with Dr. King at the Lorraine Motel, and he said he recalled the story. This is on YouTube. He recalled the story and he said, "Yeah, Dr. King and I, we were just having preacher talk, and this was right at the time when they were about to go to dinner. And then Dr. King made a request for a song to be played, 'Take My Hand, Precious Lord.' And in Dr. King's word, he said, 'Make it sound real pretty.' But Reverend Billy Kyles, I think it's Billy Kyles or Sam Kyles, but that's his last name, Kyles. He said that he came out the door." And then a Freudian slip, because when you get up in age, you start forgetting shit. No offense, Reverend Mike, but when he walked out the door, and he said in his words on his YouTube flick that Dick Gregory did, he said, "I moved out of the way so they can have a clear shot." And Dick Gregory paused it, and then you heard the response from the crowd, the gasp of the air. He said, "I heard it, I heard it." And then Dick Gregory said, "You would never thought that man probably would never thought in a million years that he would slip up and say this." And so it was a complete conspiracy to kill this man. Dexter King had said he recalled a conversation that he had with James Earl Ray. He sat down and said, "Did you kill my father?" And then James Earl Ray said, "No, I didn't." Dexter King's response, "I believe you." This is in 1978. So it took 21 years since then for the suit to be filed against the U.S. government for the conspiracy of the murder of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.
Well, you got me curious now. I'm gonna have to go digging.
Yes, please. And I encourage the audience to do that before y'all coming for me in comments and all that stuff. Do your research first. I know I'm giving uncomfortable truths, but these are the facts. These are the facts. These are the facts.
Well, I tell you, for me, I always go to, is it a conspiracy theory? Because when you're looking, in the same way when we talk about the Kennedy assassination, right? So when we're looking back, it's a lot easier to connect dots and find reasons for doing things. But I'm definitely going to look because
I'm gonna now that you brought up the Kennedy assassination, I'm gonna drop a name for you. He's still alive. He's the most renowned forensic scientist on anywhere on the planet Earth. His name is Dr. Michael Baton. And Dr. Michael Baton actually did the autopsy of President Kennedy. Yeah, he also did the autopsy, if I'm not mistaken, of Martin Luther King, because he was enlisted, for his forensic, insight. Anytime there's been the need to have an autopsy done of some higher elevated folk, Dr. Michael Baton's name was called. He was the one, he just recently did George Floyd's autopsy. And when Minneapolis police department came out with their initial findings that he was intoxicated and stuff like that, and Michael Baton produced a report that said, no, this man was murdered. This man was murdered, plain and simple.
Wow. Well, even the public story of Martin Luther King Jr.'s death was that he was murdered, assassinated, right? I mean, it's fairly well known that he was a threat to the status quo.
Sure.
That he was making change, and change was happening. So, it just.
Well, I remember folks were calling King a communist back in those days because.
Right on the heels of McCarthyism.
But that was not uncommon.
Yes.
Because people were still all in on Vietnam and the domino theory and,
Lyndon Johnson and McNamara had. Yes.
And the Soviets and the Chinese were trying
and Mao Zedong
to control the world, for to have a Marxist, which, Marxism is in direct opposition to capitalism, of course.
It sure is, yes.
So anyway, it's all very interesting. And the exploitation of people is still going on today, of course. And the planet as well.
Yes.
And King spoke to all of these things in that last year that you're speaking to. He wouldn't use these words, but I would say that he was speaking to the sustainability of a country that he clearly loved, but was really frustrated with.
Yeah, I mean, Harry Belafonte recalls this conversation, often, where he saw Martin Luther King was trouble, and he asked him, well, like, what was wrong? And Martin Luther King, lamented, regrettably, saying, "I feel that I'm integrating my people into a burning house." And according to one of his children, I think it was Yolanda. His last sermon that he didn't get to perform, that she had notes for, was stated that America was going to hell. That would have been one hell of a sermon if we get to hear it delivered, but she had the copious notes from the notes that he put together for it in preparation to deliver it.
Right.
Well, hell is a state of consciousness as much as heaven is, right? If we're going to take this metaphysical again.
And Elijah Muhammad teaches that too. Yes.
Yeah. So our work then is to deliver ourselves from a hellish consciousness and lead by example. And walk our talk and get in touch with the spirit within us and follow that inner compass.
And be willing to hear uncomfortable stuff.
Yeah.
Yes.
And then
such as this.
Yeah. Well, and then now, are we responsible for the stuff that happened then? No. but we are responsible for the things that happen now
Yeah.
and going forward. And
Yeah,
so,
you don't have blame. There's a difference between having blame and then having responsibility.
that's right.
Yeah, so blame is more causal. Responsibility is like, okay, now what? Kind
Right.
of.
Yeah.
Right. And, and to see that, it really is a win-win. So there are going to be some real uncomfortable parts, like who's going to pay for it.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's always going to come down to that eventually. But that's a conversation that has who's going to pay for it conversation has its fingers in a lot of problems that we have globally.
But you know what's interesting about that? I'm gonna let you finish, Rev. It was interesting when they ask those questions, when they're kicking around these ideas in legislative circles of who's going to pay for it, and who's going to pay for it. So that if you don't know, or if we're refusing to pay for it, then it can't pass. The very same idea when that chicken comes home to roost, to borrow Malcolm's phrase, when that chicken comes home to roost for them, they're turning around and making sure money is allocated toward that cause. So it's pretty interesting. That comes down to human nature, really, too. That we don't really have
But it's also the
empathy for.
nature of power.
Absolutely,
Right.
absolutely.
So that's I mean, a dollar really is a unit of power. For us as just normal folks, it's the power to be able to buy groceries and a car and live in a nice place, but when you're living in the real, not even the overflow, when you're living in the fire hose of life,
trying to drink out of it.
So to where do I put it becomes the issue. That's power.
Yes.
And we've seen that play out really in these last 20 years like no other time. And certainly in our lifetime. But I wasn't around at the beginning of the 20th century and the end of the 19th when remember it was the railroads.
Sure.
And the fortunes made from that. They were the original robber barons. But, we got that stuff going on again.
That's the Carnegies and so forth, Andrew Carnegie, Vanderbilts, like a lot of these powerful, wealthy families. I mentioned this a few weeks ago. I'll let you finish again, Rev. My apologies.
That's all right.
But when the United States, when they had this westward expansion, you had all these conflicts, first starting off with 13 colonies. There was a movie called Gangs in New York, and it kind of remind me of the criminality that occurred within major metropolises in the 13 colonies for sustainability. But as the country expanded westward, okay, you had cattle drivers who were trying to make their money. You had farmers who were trying to make their money. You had homesteaders who were trying to make their money. You had railroad guys. So everybody is fighting for the same parcel of land going westward. And then you can talk about cotton back in the 1800s was equivalent to what oil was in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, and 2000s, and eventually what renewable energy is in contemporary times. But cotton in the South, it was like when we say, well, slavery was just in the South, but folks, we picked the cotton in the South, and we were shipping it to factories in the North. How do you think Macy's was able to put off their Thanksgiving parade still in the late 19th century? Bloomingdale's, okay? Marshall Fields, Carson Peary Scott, Brooks Brothers, okay? So all these the suits and things like Stacey Adams. All these, every garment of clothing that you made, like Hanes. I remember I don't know if it was a Hanes commercial or if it was a commercial on cotton, where the song played, the touch, the feel, the fabric of our lives. I know I'm dating myself, but that's a hymn. I mean, cotton was the engine that made America go. That gave life to the factories. So like it wasn't just like about my ancestors being holed up in the South, but if you participated in any wheel or part of the wheel of that food chain, you were participating, in exploitation. You
Right.
know?
And it's the same thing today. I worked on a campaign called Garments Without Guilt when I lived in Sri
Hmm.
Lanka. And the supply chain sustainability, it's, planet, people, and then profit. And so if you're exploiting people to work in sweatshops, if
Yeah.
you're exploiting the planet and, using resources without them being sustainable, at the consumer end, we have the choice. We vote with our dollars, with our
Hmm.
wallets, to say this is okay, this is not okay with me. And
Right.
so that's when we have, if we do our research, be a conscious consumer, and choose a brand that has traceable supply chains and carbon
Absolutely.
footprints and all of that, that's us doing our part to make sure that those mechanisms do not continue to
By
be.
him.
Yeah, and John Perkins, the author, many of your listeners may have heard of him. He wrote in 2004 the legendary literary work, Confessions of an Economic Hitman. And he talked about how, like, if you have, like, let's say a Air Jordan shoe or a Kobe Nike shoe, okay, costs like $2 to make, right? What over in the sweatshops in China, Vietnam, Thailand, wherever it may be. Okay, so these factories are dilapidated. So what John Perkins wrote about is we would have like economic hitmen to keep in line with the literary work that he did. Will go over to these countries and assess their infrastructure. Your factories are dilapidated. Your roads are not drivable. Okay, how about we put some clothes on the backs of your kids that you're employing. How about we give you factories that have renewable energy, that have good insulation that goes through the walls and HVAC vents like we have here in America? And how about we give you good highways for trucking and distribution across your mainland? Now, how about that? Oh yeah, goody, goody, goody. And so like America finances the infrastructure in these third world countries, but then they racking up the debt. Okay, then all of a sudden they call in the debt. They go, okay, we want some of your coal, we want some of your diamonds, okay, we want some of your uranium, we want some of your phosphorus, okay, we want some of your lithium. Because we got Michael Dell putting out these computers, and we need to fire that up. We got AT&T and this 5G shit going on. We need to fire that up. Okay, so now we need like uh,
Resources.
some quartz. We need some all that shit. And
Yeah.
so then they said, no, we don't do it. So they show you the bill. They roll up a Magna Carta on your ass. Talking about, okay, remember this is what that factory costs. Okay, this is what them roads cost. This is what your rail system costs. Okay, want to holler back? Want to rethink that? And they go, okay, well, fine, you can have the resources, because the minute that you don't, all of a sudden, American planes are bombing that country. And that happens, rinse, cycle, repeat, rinse, cycle, repeat. I mean, when you look at, I remember as a kid, clothes, we seen clothes that were made in China, right? And then I looking back on this as an adult, okay, Nixon visited China in '72. Okay, that's an economic thing. It wasn't until President Clinton in 1995 lifted sanctions on the Republic of Vietnam, 20 years after the fall of Saigon, that after that point, I started seeing stuff made in Vietnam. And then all of a sudden, you see Chrysler over there, you see Ford, you see Chevy, you see Coca-Cola, you see all these American-made brands. Like over there, you probably see cruise ships along the Mekong Delta, but I mean, but like all this stuff is just like built into it, where you know folks over there now are driving on the right side of the street instead of the left side of the street. They got American cars. Okay, so now I said, oh. And I thought, so maybe that's why we went into Vietnam. It wasn't about no damn communism. If it was about communism, when Bay of Pigs fell in Cuba, you would have went back and rethought that strategy and went hollered at Fidel again. He only 90 miles off your shore. So why are we going 8,000 miles over there? It's because of resources and poor people that you can exploit. You see what I'm saying? So, like, we look back at World War II, who was the axis of evil? Germany, Italy, Japan. But only out of those three, only one of them got the atomic bomb. I think that's racist. I really think, I'm not mean to be facetious about it, but why didn't they nuke the hell out of Berlin? Why didn't they nuke Rome? Okay, they saved that for Nagasaki. They saved it for Osaka. They saved it for Tokyo and Yokohama. They bombed the hell out of them to the Stone Age. And then they rebuilt it.
Ready.
Yeah. So
it wasn't ready for Germany.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway,
Hitler came so close. But he had to.
Well, and it was Germans who helped build the bomb too, right?
Yeah.
Right.
Exactly. Yeah, but Hitler had to go and visit, try to find some place to ski in Russia, and that's what did it.
Well,
there are way too many problems for us to solve in this episode. We have hit our 1 hour mark, so our brains are full. We have much to study and choices that we can make in our lives and with our actions and with our, we may not be dropping nuclear bombs, but we can, watch ourselves from dropping hate bombs or racist bombs,
exploitive bombs.
Check ourselves, if we are making judgment calls from, sub programs that we've caught up, in our culture, and rewrite our programming. Let's evolve.
Mm-hmm.
And if we flip the word evolve, love is in there. So let's do all that.
Mm-hmm.
Mike, you have any closing thought?
Yeah, you should go to ministerial school.
Malayna, right?
This platform right here.
Yeah,
well, thank you.
I just thank you again, Salaam.
Yes.
You're welcome.
Interesting. I'm definitely going to check up on some of your history there.
Yeah, please. I'm really interested to hear what you guys think of what you find.
I hope you're wrong, is what I'm hoping. That shit is true, man. That is like, wow.
Yeah. A lot to uncover.
Yeah. All right.
Yeah.
Well,
watch the movie too now. There's some build-up prereqs to it, but watch it. You'll see.
Right.
All right. Well, thank you, audience members, for joining us on Thoughts on Talks. I'm having problems today, coughing and stuff, eyes watering. Our special Black Lives Matter episodes. Look at that. Artwork there is by Jenny Hahn. Yeah, I can peek over the cloud too. And we thank Jenny for her artwork. And thank you all for joining us. And be sure to come back and see what other things we can stir up in you.
Sure.
All right.
All right.
Thank you. Take care, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.